Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your questions, because I think it is a good precursor to some of the things that we're interested in. I don't know if either one of you know, well, I'm assuming you do, that the Drug Enforcement Agency classifies opioids as a dangerous substance potential for high abuse and leading to severe psychological and physical dependence. So because of that, that is why we created a strong network of laws on distribution. We basically said that substances like this needed to be tracked and reported, and suspicious orders red flagged, and the distribution of these drugs communicated so that the Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, could work through this. But despite the fact that that law exists, there's been large quantities of opioids flooding our communities, with manufacturers filling excessively large orders in distribution. And one example, a physician in Everett, Washington, wrote more than 10,000 prescriptions of the highly addictive OxyContin, and then there were 26 times higher than the average for Everett prescriber. In another case, an illegal opioid distribution ring in California allowed more than 1 million opioids to be distributed into a community. So my point is, where's the accountability? Where's the accountability for drug manufacturers not tracking and using that information with the Drug Enforcement Agency to work cost-effectively to try to stop this kind of distribution? Currently, the fines for manufacturing are a mere $10,000 for neglect in reporting on that distribution. So to me, that is hardly a deterrent. That's why I am asking legislatively for a tenfold increase for not reporting negligent distribution. And to me, we have to get at this problem of not tracking and seeing the signs of that distribution. Now, my colleague, Senator Harris, and I also want to address what my colleague, Senator Cornyn, just mentioned, which is giving law enforcement the tools to also deal with the heroin epidemic. The heroin epidemic is also part of the problem, and thank you. We want to make sure that they have resources to deal with heroin traffic, and we think that the front line of that is our law enforcement entities, and they need that help and support. But the question I have about this on the distribution is, does HHS have a system in place to track prescription opioids covered by Medicaid and Medicare, and knowing how they might be falling into the wrong hands?
So speaking for Medicare and Medicaid, we do, through our Medicare program, particularly the Part D program, have what's called the overutilization monitoring system, which allows us to be able to track, for instance, you were talking about beneficiaries who receive high amounts of opioids. We're able to see if they receive 90 or more morphine milligrams equivalent for a sustained period of time, say 6 months, from up to 3 or more prescribers or 3 or more pharmacies. We also have our MEDIC, which is our fraud investigations unit, which looks at prescriber data to really be able to work with the Inspector General to track those prescribers and to really look at pharmacies and prescribers who are high overutilizers and hopefully take action against them.
So you don't work with the Drug Enforcement Agency on this?
We do not work directly with them. Our law enforcement partners at the Office of Inspector General and Department of Justice do, but we at CMS do not work directly with
Do you think
DEA.
that we need larger controls in place on improper prescribing, billing, and dispensing?
We are working to try and put as many of those controls in place and agree that we need to really watch these patterns.
I think we're beyond watching these patterns. I think that's why we're in this problem, because that's all we did, and we didn't penalize the manufacturer for failing to notify. We should be able to see some problem on distribution, whether that's a drug ring or individual physician who's gone awry, whatever the issue is. We should be able to see that. That's what the law requires now. But there's no penalty or no penalty severe enough to get people's attention. So I would hope that you would look at this legislation and give us some feedback on it, and think about what improper prescribing, billing, and dispensing, what other methods we need for Medicare and Medicaid to be part of that equation.
We'll definitely take a look at the legislation and get back to you.
And Admiral, what about giving more resources for an anti-heroin enforcement ring with local law enforcement.
You know, I can only comment generally. I think we have to be all on the page to decrease the heroin supply. It's heroin and fentanyl that are now killing much more than prescription drugs, and we absolutely need to support a trans-government approach, including DOJ, local law enforcement, et cetera. Both of my parents were police officers. I understand how important the front line is to this.
Well, I see my time has expired. I would say I hope that we can come together on this because, you know, we've toured our state. We've heard unbelievable stories of what's happening. People are getting opioids just so they can sell them for the heroin because they can get that 3 times or the rate. So we need to combat both. I agree with Senator Cornyn that the heroin part of this is critical, but this is why we need law enforcement, and they need more resources and tools to do that. So I hope you'll look at this legislation and give us some feedback. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.